My name is Father Aurelius Severin. For decades I have read what was never meant to be read. Letters written in shaking hands, diaries recovered from shipwrecks and grave trenches, reports stamped, classified, and then quietly buried. They all whisper the same terrible truth. The ancient world is not dead. Its beasts have not vanished. They have only learned to live in our blind spots. Tonight, I will read to you from one such document. A diary recovered in 1887 from a sealed chest found in a decaying warehouse near the old port of Da Nang along the coast of what was once called Tonkin. The chest bore the weathered insignia of His Majesty's ship Resolute. The hand that wrote it belonged to Captain Jonathan Whitlock, master of that same vessel in the year of our Lord 1732. The church declared this account a product of fever and superstition. I am not so sure. Listen now, if you must. June 12th, 1732, off the Paracel Islands. It was the smell that found us first. We had limped 3 days under torn canvas, nursing a wounded hull and broken masts after a typhoon on our course from Singapore to Shanghai. The crew was exhausted. The Resolute groaned with every wave. When the lookout cried, "Land!" there was no cheer, only relief, as if the sea had agreed to loosen its teeth. The charts named it only as a minor harbor among the Paracel Islands, a dull and lonely place at the outer end of the trade routes. I expected an unremarkable week of repairs, stale water, and cheap rice. The sort of grinding stopover a captain dreads more than any storm. But as we turned towards the bay, the air changed. At first it was only a suggestion, a sourness carried on the wind. Then, as we closed with the harbor, it thickened into a palpable thing. It clung to the tongue and throat like an invisible rot. I watched the men at the rails wipe their mouths as though they had bitten into something foul. The smell of death and decay distilled and made ocean-born. We entered the harbor under a sky the color of dirty bone. The sea lay strangely still, as if the waves themselves had grown tired. No gulls circled overhead. No dogs barked along the shore. No human voices carried across the water. Port towns are never silent. There is always something, a hammer, a cough, a shout, a child's cry. Here there was nothing. Only the low sigh of water against stone and the groan of our own rigging. I ordered the anchor dropped. The chain rattled down into a silence so complete that several men flinched as if struck. The harbor itself was small, a ragged crescent of stone quay, warped wooden pilings, a few leaning warehouses, low houses of grey plaster and dark wood, and beyond them the thick green tangle of jungle pressing close, as if waiting for the town to make one more mistake. No lanterns burned, no smoke rose from any chimney, no fishing boats rocked at their moorings. a village of perhaps 200 souls, and yet it stared back at us like an empty skull. We hailed them regardless. It seemed important to me then, in some half-articulated way, to treat the emptiness as temporary, as if noise alone might summon life back into the place. Our voices rang out over the harbor, bounced against blank windows and faded signs, and fell dead. No answer came. I wrote in the log that evening that the town appeared deserted. The word I crossed out before settling on deserted was abandoned. Even so early, some instinct in me felt the difference. We lowered a boat at last because sailors and ships are bound to land as surely as to the sea. I went with the landing party. A captain must. It is expected. As we drew closer to the quay, the smell sharpened. It no longer seemed to come from the town, but from the tide itself. The water in the harbor was oddly clouded, as though something had been stirred up from the bottom and not yet settled. Here and there, slicks of an iridescent scum clung to the surface like oil, but when the oars disturbed them, they broke apart with strings of pale matter that looked unpleasantly like veins. No fish broke the surface, no crabs skidded in the shallows, only that film and the sound of our own labor. We tied off at a stone stair colonized by barnacles and climbed into a blank, airless heat. The first fly found us immediately, then another, then a cloud. They did not move as flies usually do, dancing, chaotic. They moved with purpose, as if they had grown used to circling something that did not move. We saw the first body at the end of the quay. It lay half in and half out of the water, wedged between two pilings, bloated, its features erased by swelling and discoloration. The clothing suggested the longshoreman, but the lack of smell from the corpse itself was wrong. Wrong. It was as if it no longer counted as the source of the stench, but only one more object submerged in it. I ordered the men not to touch it. Further along, we found another. This one was sprawled on the stones, one arm stretched toward the jungle as if in begging or warning. The flesh was pitted, as though something had fed on it in a pattern that was almost deliberate. Not the tearing of dogs or crabs, but little round perforations, neat and precise, in the throat, the eyelids, the soft parts. I have seen men taken by disease, by barbed hooks, by cannon shot. I have never seen wounds like those. We called out again, more softly, as if afraid now that someone might answer. No living soul came. The houses were open, doors ajar, a few overturned. Bowls of rice sat with a film of mold. A child's toy lay in the dust of a threshold. In one room, a table was set for 3. The teacups empty but unstained. A chair had fallen on its side as if the occupant had risen very quickly and never returned. It was not the disorder of a riot or a looting. It was the disorder of people who had stood up from what they were doing and gone out into the street, and then not come back. By late afternoon, the men began to mutter the word plague. They pulled scarves and loose cloths over their mouths. I did not contradict them. There is comfort in a known terror. And yet I saw no sores, no bloody linens, no barricades marked with crosses. Only the bodies with their neat, round perforations, and the terrible silence, and the reek that did not diminish even when we walked far from the water's edge. We returned to the ship at dusk. The horizon lay clean and empty. No sails in any direction. Above us, stars began to prick the sky like new holes. From the deck, I watched the town for a long time. No lamps sprang to life, no cooking fires kindled, no late figures hurried home. Behind some of the upper windows, something pale seemed to glimmer and fade, like a candle behind a curtain. When I pointed this out to Mr. Halbert, my first mate, he said he saw nothing and blamed the storm for ruining my eyes. That night, sleep came only in tatters. In the small hours when the world shrinks to the width of a man's thoughts, I woke to a sound I could not place. A wet, irregular dragging, as of heavy sacks being pulled over stone, or of something soft being hauled along by something that did not quite know how to use its limbs. It came in fits and starts from the direction of the quay. Between passes of that noise there was another, a wet fluttering, a faint slapping as of something fleshy and light beating against wooden posts. No man aboard the Resolute stirred or called out. It was as if the ship itself held its breath. I did not go to the rail. I tell myself this was prudence. In truth, it was terror. The smell on the night air grew almost sweet, the way meat does when it has rotted past outrage into a kind of obscene surrender. Under it, faintly, came another scent, high and sharp, like vinegar on old metal. At some unremembered hour, the sounds ceased. In the morning, the men were pale and tight-lipped, none admitted to hearing anything. Sailors do not like to speak of what visits in the dark, in case naming it invites it back. We found 3 more bodies along the quay that day. These had not been there before. I am certain of it. They lay in ungainly heaps, as though dropped from a height, limbs twisted, clothing torn in ways that did not match any human struggle. Their faces, what remained of them, were turned toward the sea. The neat round perforations were there again, clustered around the throat and the eyes. The jungle had drawn back from the edge of the town. I swear to it. Where yesterday creepers and leaves had pressed between houses, today there was a margin of bare earth, as though the vegetation had recoiled from something that had passed. I told the men that we would work quick and be gone. The hull must be patched, masts splintered. We had no choice but to make the best of this morbid shelter. They worked in crews, never alone, tools clinking too loudly in the oppressive silence. I forbade them from exploring further inland. A few cast uneasy glances at the jungle as if it might lean closer to hear. That night, the sounds returned, this time I forced myself to rise and go on deck. The sea in the harbor lay slick and untroubled. The moon, thin as a hook, rode low over the black outline of the town. The buildings were featureless boxes against a sky salted with indifferent stars. Then, from the angle of one of the warehouses, something emerged. At first I thought it a lantern being carried low, swaying rhythmically, a coil of pale, dim light dangling a few feet above the ground. As it came closer, the shape clarified, and all hope of such comforts died. It was not a lantern, it was a human head, or rather, what had once been one. The face was that of a woman, swollen and discolored, but still holding the ghost of features. Flattened nose, slack mouth, hair matted backwards as if it had been dragged for miles. From beneath the jaw, a cluster of organs trailed down in a glistening bouquet. Lungs, intestines, coiled and dripping, glimmering faintly with some unholy phosphorescence. It floated. The air itself seemed to cradle it, its trailing viscera swaying gently in a breeze I could not feel. It drifted along the quay with a slow purpose, the way a jellyfish moves in deep water. I stood frozen at the rail, unable to call out, unable to look away. As it passed beneath the ship, directly abeam of me, the head tilted upward. The eyes opened. They were milk white and empty, yet somehow I felt them fix on me with a recognition so intimate that my bones seemed to clench inside my flesh. The mouth sagged wider. The tongue, blackened and swollen, lolled and tasted the air, as if sampling my fear. From the darkness between the houses behind it, more shapes emerged. 3, 5, I lost count. Heads, all of them severed, yet impossibly alive, dangling their own wet, shimmering roots of entrails. Some were male, some female. One looked as though it had once been a boy, no older than 12. They moved without sound, flocking together in a slow, obscene procession, their organs brushing against the stones and leaving shining smears. The smell on the wind crescendoed, a wave of rot and old blood so powerful that my vision swam. One of the things broke from the group and rose higher, lifting until it hung level with the gunwale. Its organs swung beneath it like the tendrils of some grotesque sea creature. It drifted closer until only a few yards separated us. The eyes, clouded but aware, narrowed. The lips twitched, trying to form shapes that might have been words once. No sound came, only a faint, wet clicking from deep within its throat. I realized dimly that the perforations I had seen on the corpses' faces and throats matched the round, glistening mouths that ringed the creatures' dangling entrails. They were not wounds. They were feeding marks. As I watched, something moved within the cluster of organs, a ripple that traveled along the length of a glistening tube. At the tip of that tube, one of those small, puckered mouths opened, revealing tiny, glassy teeth in concentric rings, like those of some abyssal fish. It lunged for the side of the ship. I stumbled backward, finally breaking the paralysis, and shouted. My voice cracked the spell that held the deck. Men erupted from the shadows, some half-dressed, others clutching whatever came to hand. The head snapped back, the little tooth-ringed mouth retracting as if startled by the noise. The creature drifted away, joined once more by its kind. They retreated not in panic, but in languid contempt, floating back toward the key as though they had all the time in the world. Now and then, one dipped low over a sprawled corpse, and the dangling mouths descended, attaching with obscene familiarity. We did not fire upon them. No order left my throat. I know now that it would have been meaningless. You do not shoot at a fever. When dawn came, the harbor looked as it had before, empty, still, indifferent. But the slick on the water was thicker. The flies were slower, their bellies fat. I gave the order to leave that place. Repairs be damned. As the Resolute crept toward the harbor mouth under half sail, I watched the town recede. In one of the upper windows of a leaning house, something pale floated just behind the glass, as though reluctant to see us go. I write this now in my cabin as the sea, blessedly noisy again, hammers against the hull. The men avoid my eyes. I do not know how many of them saw what I did, and how many saw only shadows and heard only my terrified shout. Tonight, I noticed a faint sweet stench in my room, though the ship's physician assures me there is no infection in my lungs. When I lit a candle, I saw, at the corner of the berth, a small smear of something on the wood. It glistened faintly in the light, iridescent, veined like the skin of some translucent creature. I touched it with the tip of my fingernail. It was warm. I do not believe the harbor has truly been left behind. I believe that wherever those things fed, something of them remains, within the blood, within the breath. If this diary is found and I am not there to claim it, I ask only this: do not return to that harbor. And if you do, and if you see lights moving above the water at night, like a string of pale lanterns drifting against the wind, do not mistake them for anything that men ever made. The final pages of Captain Whitlock's diary are soaked through, the ink dissolved into a cloudy reddish bloom. No further entries survive. According to the naval records, the Resolute never reached Shanghai. Months later, she was found drifting far west of her intended route, her masts shattered, her decks stained, her holds empty. No bodies were recovered, and no official cause was recorded beyond the familiar phrase, "acts of God and sea." Yet, in the margins of the church's copy of this report, a nameless clerk once wrote, and later scratched out, a single unsettling note: the head without the body is not the worst thing in the world. The body without the soul is worse. Rome classified Whitlock's account as the product of fever and superstition. I cannot share that certainty. For years I have compared his description with other sealed records in this archive, and with fragments of folklore from the old kingdom of Siam. They speak of a creature known as the Pi-Krasu, a floating female head with its organs hanging below it, glowing faintly in the night, feeding on blood and on the unborn. This crude summary aligns with common folklore, but Whitlock's case reveals something far more troubling. The Pi-Krasu is not known to travel. It haunts the villages of its birth, a fixed and local horror. Yet something on those islands drew it far from Siam, hundreds of miles into the South China Sea. And something in Whitlock's encounter allowed it to follow him aboard the Resolute. A touch, perhaps, a trace of blood, a brief recognition. These beings bond through the smallest exchange. What unsettles me most is not what Whitlock saw, but what he did not. The Paracel Islands hold no permanent harbors today. No charts acknowledge one in 1732. Yet Whitlock described a village of 200 souls, a quay, warehouses, a customs house. All of it is absent from every map and every maritime log, as though the place itself was swallowed. My predecessors in the Index Obscura attempted to trace the drifting Resolute's path. One theory held that she made landfall at some unregistered anchorage along the coasts of Tonkin or Cochin, China, places outside the influence of the East India Company, where a strange derelict might be quietly dismantled without ever troubling the British record. But there is no confirmation, only silence, and an empty ship that should not have reached the waters where it was found. As for the creature or creatures, their fate after abandoning the Resolute remains unknown. That absence, that hollow in the record where a horror should be, haunts me more than Whitlock's written words. Before I close this file, it may be prudent to speak plainly about the being Whitlock encountered. In the oldest records of Siam, the Pi-Krasu is said not to be born, but to awaken. A woman afflicted by a particular curse, through witchcraft, through the breaking of a sacred boundary, or for reasons even monks refuse to name, finds her spirit slipping loose before dawn. Instead of departing this world, it drags her head and her inner organs with it, tearing free from the host body as effortlessly as a flame rising from a lamp. The body left behind remains warm, breathing shallowly, waiting for its return. Should the head fail to reunite with the body before sunrise, the body dies and the Krasul becomes something that hungers without limit and cannot be undone. These beings drift through the night like luminous carrion, guided by scent, the tang of blood, the warmth of a newborn's breath, the faint decay of illness. They prefer the stillness before dawn, when the veil between body and spirit thins. What is seldom recorded is this: the dangling organs are alive. Their small circular mouths, if one can call them that, feed independently, each leaving the same neat perforations found on the bodies Whitlock described. Folklore insists the Krasu is solitary, bound by shame and secrecy. But Whitlock's diary suggests a migrating pack, feeding openly, far beyond the lands where such creatures have ever been known. If this is true, then whatever stirred in the Paracel Islands was not chance, but the beginning of a movement we do not yet understand. There's one final matter Rome would prefer I did not address. The monks of Siam speak of curses, witchcraft, and broken taboos, but years spent in these archives have convinced me that creatures of this kind do not arise from sin or sorcery or any trembling of the human soul. Their behavior is biological. Terrifying, yes, but biological. The Pikrasu does not behave like a spirit. It behaves like an infected organism animated by a parasitic intelligence that inhabits human tissue without ever needing the human mind. The separation of head and body is not spiritual, but functional. The host corpse becomes irrelevant. The parasite reconfigures the remaining organs into a self-sustaining entity, a new creature using human flesh as scaffolding. Its bioluminescence reflects deep-sea metabolism. Its feeding apertures mirror the independent mouths attached to its viscera. Multiple mouths, multiple digestive pathways, multiple primitive neural centers. It is a colonial organism, not unlike certain jellyfish, siphonophores, or fungi that reorganize their hosts into something mobile. Then there is reproduction. Whitlock mentions a smear of warm, veined residue in his cabin. The same substance appears in a 1642 Jesuit account from Ayutthaya. Two witnesses, separated by a century, describing the same biological vector. I no longer believe such residue is symbolic. It is a mechanism, a means by which the parasite identifies, binds to, and perhaps even replicates itself within a new host. The krasu is not supernatural. It is not born of hell or imagination. It belongs to nature, an older, deeper nature, governed by physical laws we have not yet learned to name. And if it followed Whitlock aboard the Resolute, then its migration was not the wandering of a spirit, but the deliberate movement of the species into new territory. A parasite seeking new hosts, new environments, new ways to adapt. That is what chills me most. These beings do not defy nature, they precede it. And if they are moving, then nature itself is shifting in ways we have not yet begun to comprehend. This diary remains in drawer 73A of the Index Obscura, behind 3 locks and a veil of dust. I do not fear that anyone will find it. I fear that, having heard it, you may go looking for proof. The ancient world is not dead. It is only waiting for us to arrive where it already is. Do not hurry to meet it. Our time for tonight is finished. Tomorrow, I will return to the quiet depths of the archive and choose another forgotten file for you. Until then, rest deeply, and may the night keep you safe until we meet again.